I never imagined that the sharpest wound in my life would come not from a stranger, not from an enemy, but from the very person I had once called my pride. My son. That night the house smelled of roasted meat, bread, and spices. The table was long candles flickered, plates were set with silverware polished to a shine. It should have been a night of warmth, of family, of togetherness, but instead became a night that changed everything. I walked in quietly, holding the bottle of wine I had saved for weeks just to bring to this dinner. My coat was old, my shoes worn, but my heart was filled with a father's love. I thought maybe, just maybe, my son would look at me and remember all the nights I stayed awake to care for him. All the sacrifices I made so he could sit in the life he now enjoys. But as I stood at the edge of the room, my son turned his head, his jaw tightened, and then he said words I never thought I would hear. "Dad, you can't sit here. You're too poor for this table." The sound shattered me. Those words weren't spoken in a whisper, they were loud enough for everyone to hear. For his wife, for my grandchildren, for the friends he had invited. My chest burned, my knees almost gave way. My daughter-in-law looked down at her plate, pretending she hadn't heard. My grandchildren stared wide-eyed, not understanding, too. Young to know cruelty, but old enough to feel the tension in the air. I froze. My fingers clenched the bottle so tight I thought it might break. Too poor to sit at his table. I remembered the time when his shoes had holes, and I patched them up because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered carrying him on my back when his legs were tired, walking miles just so he could go to school. I remembered working double shifts, coming home with aching bones, but smiling as he ate the food I had saved for him instead of myself. And now he looked at me as if all of that meant nothing. As if the years I gave away, the youth I sacrificed were invisible, erased by the cruel calculation of dollars and cents. Do you know what that does to a man's soul? For a moment, I thought of leaving, just lowering my head, stepping back into the night, and swallowing the humiliation like I had so many times before. I thought of telling myself, it's just words. But deep inside, something snapped, something I had kept buried for too long. The quiet acceptance, the silent suffering, the willingness to endure every insult just to keep peace. Not this time. I looked around the room, the food steaming, the laughter paused, everyone pretending not to see what had just happened. My son's table was full of abundance, but it was empty of respect, empty of love. And in that moment, I understood something. Money may buy chairs, silverware, fine wine, but it cannot buy dignity. It cannot buy honor. So I didn't sit, I didn't beg, I didn't argue. Simply set the bottle of wine down on the counter, turned my back, and walked out. I could feel their eyes following me, some with pity, some with shame, but none with courage enough to speak up. The night air was cold, and as I walked down the empty street, my heart felt heavier than ever. But when I reached my small home, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I sat in the darkness and replayed those words again and again. Too poor to sit at his table, over and over until the anger grew hotter than the shame. And I realized something important. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought I was powerless. He thought I was small. But life has a way of teaching lessons when arrogance blinds the heart. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, my hands trembling, but not with weakness, with resolve. Because my son was about to learn that the man he called poor was the very man who had given him everything he had. And the cruel words he spoke would not go unanswered. And here's where I tell you, if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever treated you like you were less than human because of what you didn't have, then you know the fire I felt in my chest that night. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you believe in justice again. It's the very next day. The same son who pushed me away from his table was standing at my door, begging. And before I reveal how it all happened, do me this favor. Click like, subscribe, and stay close. Because life has a strange way of flipping the script. And you'll want to see exactly how quickly pride can crumble when the tables turn. Asterisk when I closed the door behind me that night. The silence inside. My small house felt heavier than the insult itself. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling, staring at the bottle of wine I had carried back from his home, unopened. The bottle became a cruel symbol of what I represented in his eyes, something unnecessary, something unwelcome, something that didn't belong. But here's what my son didn't know. He saw my worn shoes, my faded jacket, my old hands. He saw a man who lived simply, without wealth on display, without luxury or show. He assumed that meant I had nothing. He assumed that meant I was less. But hidden beneath the surface were truths he had long forgotten, truths I had never spoken aloud, because I never needed to. All night I replayed memories of our past. The first day I carried him home from the hospital, wrapped in a blanket we borrowed because we couldn't afford a new one. The nights I sat at the kitchen table with overdue bills, choosing between keeping the lights on or buying his school books. The weekends I worked side jobs, my hands blistered, my back aching, but my heart proud because I could place a meal in front of him. He didn't remember those days. Or maybe he did, and that's exactly why he despised me now. Maybe he wanted to erase the poverty of his childhood by erasing me. Maybe in his new world of wealth and appearances, there was no space for a father who wore humility like a second skin. And yet, as I stared at that wine bottle on my counter, I realized something he could never erase. Without me, he would have. Nothing. Every success he claimed as his own had been built on the sacrifices of a man he now rejected. I thought of knocking on his door again, shouting in his face, reminding him of the life I gave him. But then I stopped. Words would never reach him. Pride had built a wall too thick. No, what was needed wasn't words. It was silence. Silence that would make him reflect. Silence that would leave him helpless when the moment came. Because you see, my son thought wealth was permanent. He thought his table, his house, his success were untouchable. But nothing in this world is untouchable. Life shifts. Fortunes turn. Pride comes before the fall. And I knew. His fall was closer than he thought. That night, I sat at my small desk and pulled out a drawer filled with papers. Old bank slips, letters, documents, proof of the sacrifices I had made. The money I had quietly set aside, the investments no one knew I had nurtured. Over the years, I had built something in silence. Not for show, not for status, but as a safety net. And while I had never flaunted it, never boasted about it, I knew in that moment the time to remain silent was over. But even more than wealth, I had something my son lacked: resilience, the ability to rise again and again no matter how many times life tried to crush me. And soon he would be forced to see it with his own eyes. Morning came slowly, light creeping through the cracks of my curtains. I hadn't slept. I brewed a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and sat by the window, waiting. Part of me still hurt. The sting of his rejection was raw, searing. But another part of me, deep inside, was strangely calm. I knew something he didn't. I knew that life had already set the stage. And before the day ended, the son who told me I was too poor for his table would learn the most humbling lesson of his life. And just as I took the last sip of coffee, there it was, a knock on my door. Sharp, desperate, impatient. I froze for a moment, listening. Another knock, louder this time, and a voice trembling, rushed, filled with something I had never heard in my son before. Fear. Dad, please, open the door. Need your help. The same son who had humiliated me less than 24 hours earlier was now on the other side, begging. His voice cracked, heavy with panic. And in that moment, I knew. The tables had turned faster than I could have ever planned. What had happened in less than a day to bring him here, desperate, breaking through his pride? What had shaken his world so violently that he would come running back to the father he had rejected? Stay with me, because this is where the story truly begins. And trust me, you won't want to miss what I'm about to reveal. I stood there, frozen, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Less than 24 hours ago, Those same lips had told me I wasn't worthy of his table. Now those lips trembled, pleading through the wood that separated us. Its voice cracked, with a desperation I had never heard before. For a moment I didn't move. I wanted him to feel the silence, taste the weight of his own arrogance reflected back at him. Each second stretched, his knocking growing louder. More frantic, Dad. Please. I didn't know where else to go. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Images of last night flooded back. The humiliation, the laughter that died at the table. To shame in my grandchildren's eyes as they saw their grandfather dismissed like a beggar. My chest still ached from it. And yet, here he was, at my door, where no one had ever been turned away. Slowly, I opened the door. The man standing before me was not the polished son from last night's dinner. His tie was gone, his shirt half untucked, his eyes wild, swollen from sleeplessness. His hands shook as if the very ground beneath him had vanished. And in a way, it had. What happened? I asked, my voice calm, though inside I burned with a storm of emotions. He opened his mouth, but words stumbled and died before forming. His breath was short, shallow. He looked over his shoulder as though someone might be watching, as though danger itself had followed him to my doorstep. Finally, he whispered, Dad, I lost everything. The words hit me like a hammer. Not because of what they meant, but because of how quickly they came. Just one day earlier, he was a man of pride, a man of status, a man with a table too fine for his own father. And now, his voice was barely a whisper, stripped of its arrogance. But I didn't let him in right away. No, I stood in the doorway, blocking his entrance. Everything. I asked, tilting my head, studying him, forcing him to say it again. He nodded. His face pale. The business, the accounts, everything's gone. It's happened overnight. You don't understand, his voice broke. I don't know what to do. And I'll admit it. There was a moment, a small burning moment where satisfaction flickered in my chest. The proud son, the one who told me I was too poor to sit at his table, now stood begging at mine. Fate had its way of evening the scales, faster than I ever could. But beneath that flicker of satisfaction, something deeper stirred. A father's heart. No matter how much he had wounded me, no matter how sharp his words had been, he was still my blood. Still the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The boy who once clung to me when storms frightened him at night. I stepped aside. Come in. He collapsed into the chair by my small kitchen table, the same table that had fed him countless times as a child. It wasn't covered in silk linens or polished silver, just a plain wooden table scarred by years of use. But tonight it became his refuge. I poured him a glass of water, and he drank like a man dying of thirst. His hands trembled so violently that drops spilled across the table. I didn't rush him. I didn't comfort him. I simply watched, silent, waiting for him to gather enough strength to explain. When he finally spoke, his words tumbled out in fragments, broken by gasps. The deal went wrong. Investors pulled out. Debts I didn't even know about. They came after me. The bank accounts are frozen. They're saying I could lose the house, the cars, everything. I listened quietly. Each word was like a thread unraveling the image of the powerful man he had tried so hard to present. He was no longer the host of a grand dinner. He was a man stripped bare, terrified, sitting at the same table he once thought too small for. Dignity, dot. And do you know what struck me most? How quickly life can turn. How pride can crumble in a single night. How a son who believed wealth was a fortress now realized it was nothing more than sand in the tide. But here's the thing, he hadn't told me everything yet. Could see it in his eyes. The panic, the shame. There was something darker hiding. Beneath his words, something he hadn't confessed. Something that made him shake, not just with fear, but with guilt. And before long, I would learn the truth. A truth that would change everything between us forever. So stay with me, because the reason my son came begging at my door wasn't just about money. It was about something far more devastating. Asterisk, he sat there, at my small wooden table, his, hands gripping the glass of water so tightly that I feared it would shatter in his palms. His shoulders slumped forward, the weight of the night pressing down on him. And as much as he spoke of debts, of business deals collapsing, of investors pulling out, I could see it in his eyes. Those weren't the words he feared most. There was something else, a darker shadow haunting him. "Dad," he said finally, his voice low, hoarse, almost ashamed to use the word. For years he had called me by my first name in front of his friends, trying to distance himself from his roots, trying to bury the reminder of where he came from. Hearing him call me Dad again sent a strange ache through my chest. "I didn't tell you everything," he continued, staring down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. His thumb rubbed against the rim of the glass, back and forth, a nervous tick I hadn't seen since he was a boy, confessing to breaking a neighbor's window. But this wasn't about glass. This wasn't about childhood mistakes. This was something far greater. "Then tell me," I said, my voice steady, though inside. My blood pulsed with anticipation. "If you're here at my door, if you're sitting at this table after the way you treated me, then tell me the truth. All of it." He swallowed hard, his lips trembled. And then the words spilled out. It wasn't just the investors. It wasn't just bad business decisions. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. Dangerous people. My breath caught, but I remained silent, letting him continue. "They came last night, Dad," he said, his voice breaking, his hands shaking harder with every word. "They came to my house, in front of my wife, in front of the kids. They didn't care who was there. They threatened me. They threatened them. And if I don't pay back what I owe, and I can't, they said they'll take everything. Not just the house, not just the cars, everything." His words echoed through my small kitchen, bouncing off the faded walls like a warning bell. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. So that was it. Not just pride brought to its knees, but fear. Not just humiliation, but danger. My son's downfall wasn't simply financial. It was the kind that placed everyone he loved at risk. I studied him closely. His eyes were red, his face pale. The confident man who once looked down at me with disdain was gone. In his place sat a boy again, frightened, lost, begging for a way out. "Why come to me?" I asked finally, my voice quiet but sharp. "Why come to the father you said was too poor to sit at your table?" His eyes filled with tears. He looked up at me for the first time that morning, and for the first time in years. There was no arrogance, no wall, no mask. "Just raw desperation because you're the only one I can trust," he whispered. The irony cut deep. Last night, I wasn't good enough for his table. Today, I was the only man he believed could save him. Life has a strange way of turning pride to dust, doesn't it? But I didn't answer him right away. I let the silence stretch between us, wanted him to feel it, to sit with the weight of what he had done, not just to himself, but to me, to his family, to the values I had raised. Him with Dot inside me, two voices battled. One voice, the wounded father. The man who still felt the sting of those cruel words, whispered, "Let him face the consequences. Let him learn what it means to look down on the very hands that once fed him." But the other voice, the father, who had carried him through storms, who had given everything even when I had nothing, whispered, "He's still your son. He's still the boy you swore to protect." Finally, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, meeting his trembling eyes. "You want my help? Then you'll have to tell me everything. Names, amounts, what they threatened. Leave nothing out." His jaw tightened, his lips pressed together, and for a moment I thought he would refuse. But then, slowly, with the weight of a man defeated, he nodded, and as he began to speak again, unraveling the tangled web of debts, secrets, and mistakes, I realized something. This wasn't just about saving him. This was about saving the entire family from a storm they didn't even know was coming. And I also realized something else. The power had shifted. Last night, he held the chair at the grand table and told me I wasn't worthy. Today, he sat at mine, waiting for my judgment. The same father he dismissed was now the only lifeline keeping him from drowning. But the story doesn't end there, 'cause the more he confessed, the more I began to see that this wasn't just about money or danger. This was about legacy, about the values he had abandoned, about the man he had become. And I knew then, helping him wouldn't just mean paying off debts. It would mean confronting truths neither of us were ready for. He sat across from me, his eyes darting from the table to the floor, anywhere but meeting mine. His hands trembled so violently that the glass rattled against the wood. For years he had spoken with confidence, with arrogance even, but now his words stumbled out like a broken dam, too fast, too messy, as if spilling them might somehow lessen the weight. Dad, it started with one loan, just one. Thought I could handle it. The business needed cash flow, and the banks were dragging their feet. These men, they came to me, said they could help. No paperwork, no waiting, just cash in hand. I told myself I'd pay it back within weeks. I thought it was temporary. His voice cracked. He shook his head as if he still couldn't believe the spiral he had walked into. But the weeks became months. Interest piled up faster than I could pay. I tried to borrow more to cover the first loan, then another, then another. And before I knew it, he stopped, his throat closing, tears welling in his eyes. How much? I asked, my voice low, steady, cutting through his rambling like a blade. He swallowed hard. His lips trembled. 300,000. The number echoed. In my small kitchen, louder than thunder. My hand clenched around the edge of the table. 300,000. It wasn't just a mistake. It was destruction. He lowered his head, ashamed. They said, if I don't pay, they'll take the house. They'll take the cars. They'll ruin me publicly, and worse. They made it clear, Dad. They'll come after my family. They'll come after them. His voice broke completely at that, the image of his children flashing in his eyes. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Anger burned in me, not only at his recklessness, but at the men who dared threaten my grandchildren. My blood boiled at the thought of fear creeping into their small hearts, at the thought of danger knocking on their innocent lives. And yet, another thought seared through me like fire. This same son, had told me I was too poor to sit at his table. He had humiliated me in front of those very children. And now he sat at mine, desperate, pleading, confessing that without me, he was finished. Life has a way of turning tables. And in that moment, I felt the power shift fully, irreversibly. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together, my eyes locked. On his, and who are these men? I asked, my tone calm, though every muscle in my body tightened like a coiled spring. He hesitated. His jaw tightened. I could see the fear in his eyes. Speaking their names was dangerous, even here, even with me. But he knew he had no choice. They call themselves the Ferraro brothers, he whispered, his voice barely audible. They're not bankers, Dad. They're not businessmen. They're the kind of men you don't cross. They own nightclubs, warehouses, and they own people. If I don't pay, they'll make me disappear. They said so themselves. The Ferraro brothers. The name was familiar, whispered in corners, spoken only in caution. Men whose smiles hid knives, whose handshakes left scars. I had heard of them. Everyone had. And now my son had fallen into their web. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly, steadying myself. This wasn't just about arrogance anymore. This wasn't about money or humiliation. This was survival. My son had pulled the entire family into the jaws of wolves. When I opened my eyes, he was staring at me with desperation. Dad, please, you have to help me. You're the only one I have left. I don't care how. I don't care what it takes. Just save me. For a moment, I wanted to scream. To remind him of the shame he'd thrown on me? To ask him why I should help a man who turned his back on his own father? But then I saw it. Not the man, not the arrogance, not the pride. I saw the boy, my boy, the one who once clung to me when storms thundered through the night, the one who once trusted me with his entire world, and I knew I couldn't walk away. Not yet. I stood up slowly, pushing back my chair. He flinched, as if afraid of what I might say. I walked to the small drawer by the wall, the one he had never bothered to notice, the one that held papers and secrets he never knew I had. My hand hovered over the handle. He looked up, his eyes wide, waiting, hoping, and in that moment, I turned to him and said words that made him tremble even more than the threats of the Ferraro brothers' son. You have no idea who your father really is. Asterisk, he stared at me, confusion flooding his face. The same son who had once looked at me with disdain now leaned forward, desperate, searching my eyes for answers he never thought I could hold. Dad. What do you mean? His voice cracked. But this time, not just with fear, with something else. Curiosity, shock, the realization that perhaps the man he had written off as too poor had lived a life far larger than he ever knew. I slid. The drawer opened slowly. Inside were old documents, envelopes yellowed with time, and folders I hadn't touched in years. I pulled them out one by one, laying them on the table. Bank slips, certificates, investment papers, names of companies, records of properties. Things I had gathered quietly over decades, while he believed I had nothing. His eyes widened. Is all this? I looked at him steadily. This is the truth. While you were chasing the glitter of wealth, showing off cars and dinners and tables to find for your own father, I was building something real. Not for applause, not for pride, but for survival. For the day life would test us, for the day my family would need it most. He blinked, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He had no idea. None. And I let that silence stretch. Let him drown in the shock of it. I worked jobs you never knew about, I continued. I invested in land when no one cared about it. I saved every coin, every cent, while you mocked my old coat and my simple meals. You saw poverty, son? But what you really saw was discipline, sacrifice, the kind of wealth that doesn't glitter on the surface but runs deep beneath the ground. His face flushed, shame washing over him like a storm. His eyes darted back to the documents, scanning numbers, names, proofs. It was all real. It's every bit of it. And now, I said, my voice low, you come to me afraid of the Ferraro brothers, terrified for your family, and you beg me to save you. Do you think I'm too poor to sit at your table? But here you are, sitting at mine, because you finally understand. The richest thing I've ever owned is the strength you never valued. His eyes filled with tears. He dropped his head into his hands. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. For a moment, I simply looked at him. The arrogance was gone. The pride was broken. And what sat before me was not the man who had humiliated me, but the boy I had once raised. The boy who finally remembered who his father was. I reached across the table, laying a steady hand over his trembling one. I'll help you, son. Not because you deserve it right now, but because family is worth saving. Even when they've forgotten what it means to love. Even when they've lost their way. But understand this time it comes with a lesson. It's a lesson you will never forget. His eyes lifted, wet with tears, his voice trembling. Anything, Dad? I'll do anything. I leaned closer, my voice firm, carrying the weight of years he had ignored. Then learn this. Respect is worth more than any fortune. Pride will destroy faster than poverty ever will. And never again, never again. Look at your father and see less than the man who gave you everything. The room fell silent. Outside, the world moved on, cars passing, birds calling. But inside, everything had shifted. The balance of power, the understanding of love, the weight of respect. That night, for the first time in years, my son sat at my table. Not his, mine. And he bowed his head, humbled, broken, but alive, because his father the man he once cast aside, had chosen to save him instead of letting him drown. And as I watched him eat the simple food I placed before him, I knew that tables had turned forever. So if you've ever been underestimated, if anyone has ever told you that you weren't good enough, remember this silence holds more power than pride. And sometimes the richest revenge is forgiveness.